Wednesday is the first god we are officially introduced to and is Shadow's main companion throughout the story. Suave and cunning, Wednesday is a witty older gentleman who has a way with the ladies. When we first meet him, he is described as having a craggy square face with pale gray eyes and wearing a suit the color of melted vanilla ice cream. As the story continues, we see that he keeps himself well kept, staying clean and always having a fresh suit to change into. One of his pale eyes is in fact a glass eye, disguising the fact that the real one has been lost. Wednesday describes the sacrifice he made, hanging and pierced by spears, to learn charms that would be able to alter fate in many circumstances. However, throughout the book, these aren't what Wednesday uses to complete his tasks. We see what mostly gives him power is his cunning and his smooth talking. He is a con artist. Several times we see him use deceit to get things to go his way. In Chicago, he tricks folks into thinking he works for a bank to steal their money. On a couple of occasions, he shortchanges waitstaff, and he also goes into detail about his favorite con in a conversation with Shadow. At the end of the book, we learn that Wednesday had been working all along to fool the other gods to shed their blood in order for him to gain more power, showing just how far he is willing to push his powers of deceit. This lack of actual magic use is something that is common across all the old gods we see in American gods. It's probable that, due to their lack of worshippers and belief, their fading powers are not as strong as they were in the past. In ancient Norse mythology, Odin has some similarities to the Wednesday from GAIMAN'S novel. The idea of his self-sacrifice that becomes such a key component in American gods is in fact a popular story about Odin. We also see Wednesday as a leader figure, another aspect that is in line with the traditional tales of Odin. Unlike in American gods, Odin is not exactly depicted as a sly, sex-driven grifter in Norse myths. However, there is a story about him sleeping with the daughter of a giant to steal something he was after, so this may have been part of what inspired GAIMAN'S representation of the god. He is also known as the Allfather, as we see in the novel, and is supposed to have had many children with many women, which also backs up some of Wednesday's character traits. As for the actual use of magic, Odin is much more powerful in Norse mythology. He is a shapeshifter, able to transform into myriad animals, something which we do not see of Wednesday in American gods. He is also said to be able to speak with the dead, which doesn't exactly happen in the novel, though the line between life and death is often blurred anyway. Wednesday is in possession of the same familiars as Odin. He describes his wolves and his ravens while at the house on the rock, though it is his ravens that play the most prominent role in the story, helping to guide Shadow when he is lost. We first meet the Slavic god Czernobog in the Chicago apartment he shares with the Zorya sisters. Czernobog is depicted as a grouchy old man who enjoys little aside from killing cattle and playing checkers. He agrees to help Wednesday only as a result of a checkers match against Shadow, which he was coerced into playing with the promise that, should he win, he would get the chance to smash Shadow's skull. We see Czernobog warming up to Shadow a bit after Shadow risks his life in playing this game of checkers. Upon completion of their second match, Shadow offers to continue, to which Czernobog simply responds, "I like you." Later on, Czernobog is one of the party who helps rescue Shadow after his arrest. Czernobog initially discusses his brother Belmaia, saying they are estranged because of differences of opinions. While Czernobog focuses on darkness, Belmaia focuses on light. At the end of the book, it is revealed that they are actually one being, something Czernobog prophesied earlier, with Czernobog turning into Belmaia at the end of the winter. According to Old Slavic myth, the two deities Czernobog and Belmaia are known as the Black God and the White God. The two were opposing forces, good and evil, and unlike in American gods, it's not suggested that they are two sides of one person, nor even that they are brothers. Czernobog was seen as the root of all bad things in Slavic legends. He was said to only appear at night, which is contrary to what we see in GAIMAN'S story, where he exists all winter. It's possible that this was inspired by the fact that parts of the Slavic world have long, dark winters, where Czernobog would be present for a much greater portion of time than Belobog. Belobog was pictured as a man who spread good fortune around the Slavic world. While in the book Czernobog doesn't exhibit any of his actual power, again likely because he is fading like Wednesday, in Slavic lore he was highly feared. As Czernobog and Belobog were the two central forces of good and evil in Old Slavic mythology, they would have had great power they could use to enact their wills upon the world. When Mr. Jacquel is first introduced, he has taken the form of a black dog. Later on, when he has taken his human form, he is described as being tall with very dark skin. Mr. Jacquel works in the funeral home with Mr. Ibis. He works dissecting the bodies that enter the funeral home, a nod towards his role in working with the dead in Egyptian mythology. He is shown to be quiet and calculating, tackling his work with an efficient, systematic approach. Jacquel and Ibis recount to Shadow their history, how they came over with traders from ancient Egypt and were now some of the only remaining gods of their pantheon in America. They tell how other gods died, disappeared, or went insane. Near the end of the book, we see Mr. Jacquel take his true form as the gigantic, jackal-headed Anubis. He acts as the judge to decide whether Shadow can enter his afterlife or not. Anubis analyzes Shadow's past, every good and bad moment, to help him make his determination. Then he uses his scale to weigh Shadow's heart against a feather for the final judgment. Anubis's role in American gods is very similar to that in ancient Egyptian mythology. His form of a black dog clearly represents the jackal, the animal linked with Anubis, which we also see when he takes on his usual jackal-headed form later in the book. His dark skin is reminiscent of the fact that Anubis is portrayed as having black skin. Anubis was the god of mummification and sometimes considered the god of death. In one ancient Egyptian story, Anubis worked in the embalming and mummification of the god Osiris, who later himself went on to become the god of death. Anubis does in fact use a scale with a feather to judge those who enter the afterlife, just as he does with Shadow. In Egyptian tales, he has also had other powers we don't witness in American gods. One example is a story in which he destroyed his enemy's entire army with a single slash of his sword. It's not clear whether GAIMAN'S version of the god possesses the same sort of ability. Shadow first meets Eostre during his trip to San Francisco with Wednesday. Her description fits that of someone who just stepped out of a 1950s movie screen, red-lipped and blonde-haired. She appears to be doing well for herself, having an abundance of food and no worries. Wednesday pressures Eostre into working with him by reminding her that her wealth of belief comes simply from the fact that she is linked with the holiday Easter, not because the goddess Eostre is actually being worshipped. But Eostre is one of the few gods that is still receiving some type of worship from the population, which may be the reason that she is one of the few we actually see using magic. We are shown that she has the ability to make plants grow and bloom. Then, more impressively, we see her bring Shadow back to life. Eostre breathes life back into Shadow with a kiss. Gaiman writes that the wound in Shadow's side began to flow with liquid blood once more, a scarlet blood, which oozed like liquid rubies in the sunlight, and then the bleeding stopped. It is then revealed that the wound has been healed, and Shadow is alive once more. The origins of an actual goddess Eostre is foggy. There is debate on whether such a figure existed at all. Eostre was supposedly a springtime goddess worshipped by the Anglo-Saxon tribes in ancient Britain. Accounts of a goddess named Eostre are traced back to one source from the 8th century, which connected such a deity with the month April. In the 19th century, other sources built off of this, postulating that she might have been related to a broader Germanic goddess that was spread throughout Europe. But again, it is unclear whether this goddess ever truly existed to be worshipped or whether it was simply invented by scholars. Given that accounts of this goddess stem from one source, there aren't many descriptions of the power she would have possessed. There are stories, though, that crop up surrounding her relation to the Easter Bunny. Many of these stories suggest that she had the power to turn a bird into a hare, which some claim was sacred to her. But again, it is unclear whether these stories have any basis in actual religion.